that's why it happened. Does that sum it up?
It's
Later
they choose to do the bad. And
later, the Parsha didn't talk about the food, the kosher.
Yeah, there's food, everything. Let's go to chapter 12 on page 489. Okay? If you look at verse 2, it says you must obliterate all the places where the nations worshipped, whom you have inherited, who you're inheriting, the gods and the high mountains and the hills. And it really goes into detail how you have to totally uproot it. Look at verse 4. It says, do not act this way to Hashem your God. Okay? Now, of course, the sages immediately react to this and say, which Jew would willingly, knowingly act this way to Hashem your God? To destroy a house of worship, to bring down a place which is of service of Hashem, a place of study, a place of service, a place of doing mitzvot. Which Jew would do this? Who's Moshe speaking to? So first of all, Moshe is saying to the people, do not behave in such a manner that will cause the destruction of the holiness of the temple and so on. So that's A. But B, there's actually a very important law. There are laws, there are halachot, okay, that come out from this verse. Just like, and in the literal sense, just like Hashem says, you got to destroy all the pagan images, all the avodah zarah, all the idolatrous things, and so on. You're not allowed to do this to God. So we know you're not allowed to erase God's name. You're not allowed to cause any destruction or defecation, to deface any whatsoever holy objects and so on. That's why it's very, very important to even be aware of the fact, and I know this perhaps for you is not news, but for many people it is. And people, don't know you, and they get to know me after a while. They're like, oh, that's how you write it. That's why you do it. But let's say, classical example. Most people, if they want to write thank God, they write thank, G-O-D. So you spell God. But God is Hashem in English. And for that matter, I got news for you. If I live in an Arabic country and I write Allah, which again, Allah doesn't mean anything but God, it just happens to be in their language. Or if I'm in Russia and I go Bogu, that's God, that's sacred. You cannot erase that. Even, for example, if you're writing the word Lord in the context of divine, of God, you can't write L-O-R-D unless it's a printed material which won't typically go to the garbage, which now would be defaced. But if it's just on a piece of paper, and somebody might inadvertently throw it out in the garbage because they don't think much of it, you've caused for Hashem's name to be defaced. And therefore, and the Rebbe was actually very, very particular about this and pointing this out, therefore one should get into the habit, if you're writing anything in reference to God, which is obvious and typical reference to God, you write, let's say, G-D. If you're writing Lord, not as Lord in England if somebody's a Lord, but a Lord in terms of Lord our God, L-R-D. So it's not written in full. You never wrote it. Even the word Almighty. So capital A-L, mighty. Okay, it's very interesting. But this is exactly what he's saying here. Not to deface. And of course, the obvious, not to deface, not to destroy, not to treat with disrespect any holy object, anything that assumes holiness, whether it is a pair of tefillin, whether it is a Torah scroll, whether it is a mezuzah, whether it is even a printed material like this, or a brochure that has words of God on it, that has Torah on it, and Torah teachings, or whatever it is, or prayers, it needs to be treated with respect. In fact, you'll see on many, especially those that are printed under the auspices of Chabad, because the Rebbe always directed to do it, somewhere at the bottom to write, the fine print, please treat this matter with the due, respect or holiness that it deserves. Because people should realize that this is not just another pamphlet. You're finished reading it, just discard it, throw it in the garbage. Because it needs to be treated with respect. Now, as far as the mitzvah that he says over here, of uprooting places of idolatry and so on, it's obvious that this does not apply today in the literal sense. If a Jew should go and actually start breaking whatever images or whatever it is, he'd be doing basically, let's just say, an act of suicide, and legitimately so. I mean, you put to death, and not only that, but think about the ramifications of it. Create, God forbid, a terrible situation for the Jews living in that community, or who knows, the world over, right? So it's certain and obvious that one should not engage in this. This is obviously what Moshe says, when you're in your own land and it's a sovereign place, you need to clean it, you need to cleanse it from all the non-pure things. In other words, since God dwells there, you need to cleanse it, you need to clean it out from all the impurities, which are all these idolatrous things. Just to share with you, I remember once reading a story, an amazing story, that just illustrates what I just said. Do not do this, okay? However, in a spiritual sense, we should do it, okay? Sometimes, without realizing, we bring things into our homes, we bring things into our lives, which really are, if not actively or actually, but perhaps in spirit, idolatrous. There are things that don't belong in the Jewish home, that don't belong in our lives. And that, in that sense, we gotta root them out, we gotta take them out. So this story goes back, I want to say, several hundred years, with this very pious individual that his whole life was dedicated to study Torah. Obviously, one night he just snapped. And it was evident in the fact that he went around to all the houses of worship in the, obviously not the synagogues, breaking off and destroying all the images, all the Catholic churches, but destroying and breaking all the crosses off. Well, it didn't take long. He was caught, and he was sentenced to death for doing such a thing. I mean, he was sentenced to death. And he was indeed put to death. Not too long after that, his widow came to the rabbi, to the community leaders, to ask for assistance. She has no one to support her. And the community leader said to the rabbi, look, we have a fund to help unfortunate people who have gone through a loss, widows, people who are ill. But in this case, this is not something that we should be responsible for, because this guy committed suicide. Why should it fall on the community? And the rabbi agreed with him. He's like, look, as bad as we feel for her, but it shouldn't become the community's problem. The guy just acted so carelessly, and so, to say the least, so carelessly, so insanely, and now we should become responsible. That night he had a dream. And in the dream, he actually saw this very, very shining figure, very majestic, which obviously, with a crown and everything, a king. The light was so strong, he couldn't, and the figure introduced himself. He said, I want you to know that what you did today, your decision today, you're doing an injustice to me. And he said, I don't even know who you are. He says, I am Menashe, the infamous Menashe the king. Now, who is Menashe the king? Menashe is the one who, it says, Ha'emid Tselem Behechal. He actually put an idol in the actual main chamber of the Beit HaMikdash. He went so far. And that was actually the beginning of the end. That was the beginning of, there was downhill, and it led to the destruction. That crazy guy was a reincarnation of my soul. I can't tell you how many times my soul came back down here to fix that. Just like I had that I did a selfless act, almost an act of courage, but in the negative, to do what I did then, which was a totally insane act, something that was beyond the scope of rationale. To counter it, to fix it, for my soul, I had to do the exact opposite. And that's what happened. But by you making it now difficult for his family, I will not get my peace. Very interesting story. But this is an exception. So nobody, even if you get the urge, please don't go anywhere.
Well, it's
you know what I'm
also
saying?
in the when you pray the Amidah, you pray for Hashem to disperse and destroy those who, those who strayed away the ways of Hashem, And I was listening to a class where it says it's not our job to do that. It's not our job to go into anybody and say, let's say a Jewish person going into, switching to the other side, and you just go there and beat them up.
No, God forbid. No,
and so,
it's not it's not our job, you're not allowed to do it.
Exactly. So he was explaining precisely what you're saying now. It's not our jobs to go there and go bananas. It's up to them make their choice. They're going to have to face their own consequences.
Yeah, our job is to try to bring a person closer, to show them the proper love and the attention that
Absolutely.
they need, and show them the good side of it, not to beat anyone up. Let me just, a few more little things. They're not little, they're not small, they're very, very important, very big. Turn to page 492. It's chapter 13, verse 28. Okay, chapter 13, verse 28. And the truth is, I'm skipping a whole lot. The laws of kashrut, the laws of kosher animals, are again mentioned here, and I say again because remember, this is still, the whole book is a repetition of all the past. Very few things that are added actually that we learn extra, that we learn by having, by referencing back from the past. Where it was mentioned the first time and here, but since we've already discussed it in the past, I want to focus on these things that we haven't yet ever touched on. If you look in this verse, it says as follows: preserve and heed all these words that I am commanding you, in order that you have it good, and your children after you forever. That means it's good for you, as it says literally in the verse, it says, Leman yitav lach, in order for that it should be good for you, and to your children that come after you forever. When you do, or you shall do, that which is good and that which is upright in the eyes of Hashem, your God. It may be such an innocent statement, or at least it may look like, but this is actually a very, very powerful statement. This is telling us that it's not enough as a good Jew, as a proper Jew, somebody who really follows in the ways of Hashem, it's not enough to go according to the letter of the law. In fact, we have a whole tractate in the Talmud, known as Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, that is all about going beyond the letter of the law. Because it says over here, not only that you should do that which is good, but that which is good and upright. And we find actually many examples, stories relating to the Talmud. And remember, the Talmud is not a book of stories. When the Talmud gives us a story, it gives us an actual visual, a reality of how to apply something. And the Talmud tells the stories. If I remember, one that comes to mind was a certain rabbi who had a business, and he had workers who were transporting the barrels, and some of them, they broke some of the barrels. And according to the letter of the law, he felt like he was right, so he withheld their pay. And prior to them starting to work, they had taken off their outer garments, coats, their sweaters, and left it in his possession. He didn't want to return it for them because he just suffered a great loss. And when he came, they summoned him to court. When he came to the other rabbis, which were his peers, the rabbi said to him, go give back their garments. He said, but is that the law? He said, no, but he quoted in this verse. For you, for a person of your stature, you're right. Technically speaking, you can withhold their pay because they damaged your things. They didn't do it intentionally. They're not bad people. They're just basic poor chaps trying to make a living, schlepping these big barrels and stuff, and a few slipped out of their hands. They didn't do it intentionally. So give back the garments. So he gave back the garments. And he said to them, but now, I think you should pay them their wages too. They worked all day. So what? Pay them their wages? And again he says, you should do that which is good and upright in the eyes of God. So we do see, of course, in that case, I want to make it clear, he didn't impose it on him. He did not force him. because the court cannot force you to go beyond the letter of the law. The court can only impose the law, implement the law. But in that case, because these were his colleagues, and he said to him, come on, we're at a different level. You're such an important person. You're a revered rabbi. You're a scholar. You got to do beyond just the minimum. I can't force you, but I strongly encourage you. And he did. I mean, to his credit, he did. Okay, this appears in Bava Metzia. Very powerful story. Because there are times, many times in our lives, when we encounter situations where, we're in the right. We're just like in a good relationship. How does the saying go? I should say it more to myself. You want to be right, or you want to be happy? Okay? So most men know, I want to be happy. At least try to work in that direction. You want to be right? Technically right? Or you want to be a good person? You want Hashem to be happy with you. And the truth is, if I may, and especially now that we're about to approach the last month of the year, and every time we read this Parsha, it's going to be around that time, around the month of Elul. The truth is that the way we behave, the way we act, is going to be reflected the way Hashem acts with us and behaves, so to speak, with us. That means whatever happens above is a reflection of our actions. So imagine, nobody here around this table, I can only speak for myself. No one's perfect. We don't toe the perfect line. Sometimes we're a little out of line, a little this. Would we want Hashem also when it comes time of judgment, especially the day of judgment, Rosh Hashanah, to say, well, let's take out the books. What's right is right. What's wrong is wrong. No. How do we actually, so to speak, get the heavenly court, Hashem, to go beyond the letter of the law, the strict line of the law? When we behave that way. So sometimes we have to let things go. Even if we had a bad moment. Now, I'm not talking about if we had a bad moment and apologize later. I'm talking about sometimes a person did something wrong, they didn't mean to do it. Yes, they hurt you. In that case, I say, don't become too American. Americans become very, no, this is not, be a little Jewish. You know what I mean? Be a little easy. Go, let things go. You know what I mean? Sometimes forgive. Doesn't mean we have to be pushovers. Don't make no mistake. It doesn't mean that you have to let people step all over you. That is not a virtue. That's a weakness. It means that even when a person is in control of a situation, like in the case of that rabbi, and the other rabbi suggested it, he initially didn't think of it because he was upset, and rightfully so. But look what kind of good person he was. Once he said to him, he said, you know what? You're right. So he gives them back their coats, and he pays them, and in those 8 hours or 10 hours they worked that day, they also broke a few of his barrels and he incurred a loss. So you write it off as a loss. Today it's even easier, I guess, in a case like that, because you write it off your taxes if you're smart. You have a good accountant. You need a Jewish accountant for that. Anyway, so, that's just, I wanted to bring that perspective out because that's a very, very important one. It's so powerful that really if we all live by this, most of our problems will disappear. Just, again, think, you want to be right, or you want to be happy, or do what makes Hashem happy. And again, I just want to remind you not to be a pushover, okay? Let me just go to another thing on the bottom of page 494. That's chapter 14, okay? And this is where it introduces all the kosher and non-kosher things. But it starts off with something very powerful. It says, Banim atem Hashem Elokechem. You are sons, you are children to Hashem your God. Do not lacerate yourselves, do not make yourselves bald between your eyes. This is things as a custom that the pagans would have when someone died. They would tear their hair out and they would cut themselves and so on. And this also obviously, in the obvious sense, pertains to ridiculous, body piercings and all kinds of things that people do. Tattoos also. It says, clearly you can't make tattoos, and it's very interesting. What is Hashem saying? What is really Hashem saying? If you think about it, and anybody around this table, we have children, we know people have children. think about the sentence. When I say to my child, you're my child, what am I saying? I own you? I'm going to control you? No, it's the greatest expression of endearment. I care so much about you. Don't do it because you're my child. But I can do whatever I want. Yeah, you could. Can't stop you. Especially if you're over 18. Do whatever you want. But it's going to hurt me. And that's why when it comes to these things about maintaining the sanctity, even the outer sanctity of the image of a Jew, not talking about just the soul. We spoke a lot about the soul, about it maintaining the sanctity, the holiness, that aura of purity. We're talking about even the body, the way the body looks, the way the body appears. Hashem says, you're my children. I want you to look good. I want you to look...
You're a reflection of me.
Yeah, but I want you to look good. He's not saying that I want someone else to look bad. But why am I telling you this? Not because I'm trying to boss you around, not because I'm trying to control you, but because you matter to me. This is really important to me. I need you to know this, and that's why he introduces by saying, "Banim atem Hashem Elohechem." You are like children to Hashem your God. But look what he continues. Look at verse 2. For you are a sacred people to Hashem your God. And Hashem had chosen you to be for him a treasured people from all the people that are on the face of the earth. Hashem is not saying that no one else exists. Hashem is not saying that there aren't anyone else. It's not, oblivious to it. But he's saying from everybody that exists, I want you to know that I chose you and you mean a lot. And then he continues with the laws of what we can eat, what we can't eat, and so on. And elsewhere the sages give us a metaphor for this. So what is the connection? What is the connection? You tell me I'm so special and therefore I can't eat this. Or therefore I shouldn't eat this. You know what the connection is? The sages give us a very practical metaphor of a prince, of the crown prince. It's obvious the crown prince growing up in the palace eats only the best of foods and has, in a way, you can say even very sensitive stomach because he's used to eating refined foods, good food, they're vetted, they're really good. Suddenly, if you take him from that extreme, him or her, princess or prince, throw them into some kind of jungle somewhere where they eat raw food, whatever, he'll get sick instantly. He'll start throwing, his stomach cannot tolerate it. And that's what Hashem is saying. You're a refined people. You're royalty. If you're royalty, you have to eat royalty. But it's good for everyone else in the world. They're not royalty. They're not royalty. And I use this and I say this specifically because sometimes people go, well, the reason why you can't mix let's say, meat and milk, which is mentioned in this week's Parsha, it's because it's unhealthy. I go, I beg to differ. I disagree with that. And I have proof that it's not unhealthy. You know what my proof is? How many billions of people live in the world? Several billions of people, right? How many millions of Jews are there? I don't know, 50, 20, let's exaggerate, 20. From all the billions of people, they're eating meat, eating milk, and no one's dropping like a fly, They're not dropping like flies. They're not dying instantaneously. Otherwise, all the Burger Kings would be closed, all the McDonald's and everything else, right? The health department would shut them down. It's obviously not, it might be unhealthy on a certain level, but for that matter, as people argue, bread's unhealthy, gluten's unhealthy, I don't know, everything's unhealthy. That's the good news. The bad news is, I don't know what's true, what's not, but let's get back to this. Let me stick to what I know at least. What Hashem is saying is, it's not unhealthy. That's not the reason. It's just that you're royalty. You eat differently. You are different. And that's what Hashem says with saying this. And we have to remember this in everything we do. But why? Why do we have to dress different and why do we have to behave different? Because you are different. You're different. You are. Why? Because Hashem chose you. We cannot unchoose ourselves or become unchosen. There's no such thing. No such thing. Hashem chose us. But he also says it's not just a matter of choice. It also has the aspect of, like children, how do you undo that? You can divorce a spouse, God forbid, but you cannot divorce a child. You can choose not to have contact with the child, but that child remains your child for eternity. That never changes. The parent-child relationship never changes. And that's the way Hashem classifies it, by his choice. No one forced him to. That's how he puts it in the Torah. That's very important for us to remember. And there's so much more to talk about about helping each other and, helping the poor, assisting the poor, giving a loan to the poor. I just want to touch on that and then we'll finish with that. If you look at verse, on page 497, chapter 15, let's do verse 7. It already says before how you should help, assist the poor. But over here it says it very, very specifically, very directly. If there should be someone destitute in your midst amongst one of your brothers in one of your cities, in your land that Hashem, your God, has given you. By the way, why does it go through all this? Why can't it just say another Jew, a fellow Jew? Why does it have to say one of your brothers, one of in your city, and so on? This actually also gives us the pecking order, because there's an order of obligation, right? Like the Talmud says, Aniye ircha kodmim. The poor of your city come first. Okay, so obviously there's an order of if somebody can give charity, if somebody's going to help, you don't go help somebody in a strange foreign land when you have poor people living right near you. Those are the people that are nearest to you. Or help your poor family. Okay, so your person has, some people they know to be very charitable, but when it comes to their own brothers and their own sisters and maybe their own cousins, they're not so charitable. And for whatever reason, whatever motive they have, that's not really consistent with the Torah's ways. But the Torah says, what should you do? Do not harden your heart and do not close your hand from against your destitute brother. Rather, you must surely open your hand generously to him, and you must surely extend a loan to him to cover the wants which he lacks. And Hashem says, look out for yourself, lest there be an evil thought in your mind, saying, soon comes the 7th year, and in the 7th year knows all loans, and then how am I going to get my money back? And what does Hashem say? I'm paraphrasing now. Hashem says, look in verse 10, you must surely give him. He says, nason titen lo. You should certainly give him. Don't worry. Why? Hashem says, I am the one that's telling you to do it. And I want to talk about this topic a little bit because really, it's a difficult thing. You're asking a person to take their money and help another person, give him a loan. Now, you're not giving a loan here to a rich person. It tells you the person's destitute, and they have wants. They're just in need of everything. So give him a loan, and I don't know who's going to pay back. I don't know who's going to pay back. Especially in this case where he says, well, if he doesn't pay you back by the 7th year, during the time when they had the Holy Temple, and this was active, this concept, it's going to know the loan, and I lose my money. And Hashem says, it's not him that you're giving it to, it's me you're giving it to. Of course, first we need to remember, where did I get the money in the first place? And by the way, this does not mean to give all your money out. You still have to do it within reason and within proportion. However, here is a very powerful thing. And this the sages tell us, quote, had the verse not said it, if it wasn't written in the Torah, we would never be able to say it. It would be blasphemy to say it. What is that? There's a verse in Psalms that says, Malveh Hashem chonen dal. One who has compassion on the poor person, one who gives to the poor person, is Malveh Hashem, is loaning to God. Becomes a lender to God. Why is that blasphemy if we would have said it on our own had it not been a verse? Because the fact is, and especially by Jewish law, that Eved loveh leish malveh. The borrower is a slave to the lender. Meaning, if the lender wants to be kind and forgive the loan, that's fine. But if the lender, even if the lender is the richest person in the country, and they call the poorest person owes them, they have an IOU, the court has to implement it because that's the law. And that person is a slave. They can't say, well, I don't have, well, I'm sorry. There's no such thing, I'm sorry I don't have. You have to pay back. You got to do whatever's in you. You go work and pay it back. Garnish your wages, whatever it is. So imagine if you're saying that Hashem, I become a lender to Hashem when I help the poor. What is that ostensibly saying? God's my slave. Because that's what it is. It can't be said, but Hashem says it. It's a very powerful thing. It's very, very powerful. I can tell you from people that I know, I've seen it. Sometimes the things that happen, we don't understand why it seems like good people who help, Hashem puts them through a test. But in general terms, when you are there to help others, guaranteed, Hashem pays he pays his debts. He pays very well. He pays very well. In fact, if we're talking about that, loaning and helping the poor, helping others, in general, every single mitzvah, the rule is you can't test God. And Hashem says several times in the Torah, I don't want to look for the references, but trust me that Hashem says, don't test me. He says, don't test me like you tested me in the desert always. Don't try me out. Don't give me any ultimatums. Don't give me any tests. Do what you got to do. I will do what I have to do. Yes, I promise you do what you have to do. I'll take care of you, but you do what you have to do. There's only one mitzvah that Hashem says, and the words that He says, Bechanuni na bezot. Please test me with this. In other words, Hashem says, test me with this. And that is the mitzvah of helping the poor, of going out there. And He says, He continues, I think it's Jeremiah, where He says,
Malachi.
Has anybody, Malachi?
Malachi. It said, test me and you see how your barns...
Right, Malachi. So He says, test me, and see if you give from your bread to the poor and so on, if I'm not going to open up the windows of the sky and so on. And in fact, on that, shows us how far and how great the blessing goes. Where the prophet says, V'harikoti lachem bracha ad belidai. And I will, laharik means to just dispense. But dispense in a way where you take something, you just turn it over and just pours out. I will just shower on you blessings ad till